What's going on, guys? So I was in Jcarver, aka Jason Somerville, aka N boss of Twitch poker stream the other night, and he was playing the great game of Pot Limit Omaha. So I got a message in my group chat from my buddy Matt. He said, "Hey, Jcarver's playing PLO." He knows I love watching when anyone plays PLO, especially guys on Twitch. So I went in there to check it out. I saw a couple hands, and the last hand he played I thought was very, very interesting. And I thought it was interesting because it's a spot that I'm sure comes up for a lot of players in PLO where they just aren't really sure what to do, why they're doing it. They don't really know how to think about the spot. And when you take a look at the hand, you'll take a look that Jcarver kind of got himself in that situation where he wasn't exactly sure what he was doing or why he was doing it. And I just thought it was kind of interesting to talk about. So I'm going to play it and yeah, let's get into it. So Jcarver is playing three-handed 2-5 zoom. And he's facing a small blind min raise, and he's in the big blind with Jack 6-2-8 Badoogie, which is a very, 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 very bad hand. And you're in position, you're facing a min raise. I mean, you pretty much can never fold. I'm never folding here. So he calls. The flop's Jack 10-10 or Jack 10, and he flops trip jacks with three undercards to the board. Not necessarily very good kickers, and 15 Kemba ends up betting the size of the pot, and Jcarver ends up calling the bet. All right, so the turn comes and turns a two of hearts, and now Jcarver makes a second nuts, makes second best full house. He's got Jack 2, 6-8, Jack 2, only beaten by Jack 10, and his opponent bets a really weird size. He bets 25 into 56, so he bets under half pot, which is kind of a pretty interesting size. So Jcarver thinks about it for a little bit, and thinks about calling, thinks about raising it, and he ends up making it a little bit more than three times the bet, 82-84, and then he faces the bad news when 15 Kemba repots it and essentially going all in. Jcarver thinks about it for a little while, says, "I don't think I can fold my hand."
I don't think I'm gonna fold here. I mean, it sucks. If he has Jack 10, we're dead. He could have 10-10 or deuce-deuce. Unlikely he has 10-10, but it is possible, I suppose. I do beat 10-10. I do beat deuce-deuce. The only hand I lose to is Jack 10, which is possible he has the Jack 10, but I don't think I'm going to fold it. I guess running it twice is meaningless, but we're probably getting stacked here. Yeah, he has the Jack 10. I mean, I guess I could have folded it pre. I mean, I could fire again. I mean, this game seems okay. Doesn't seem game.
So let's kind of look at the hand. And so we go back to pre-flop. Pre-flop, as I mentioned, it's a very bad hand. I think I would always recommend that most people that are new to PLO just fold the hand. Even though you are getting a really great price on your money, a lot of players are just going to have, I mean, you're in position. Like, I'm never folding the hand, but I think what happens is you get yourself into a lot of situations with weekends pre-flop where, and this is kind of how you learn the game, is that you put yourself in these spots and you learn from them. But most people are going to end up making a lot of mistakes with that hand. I always tell people that are new to PLO, try to put yourselves in position where you kind of know what you're doing. Jcarver does decide to call. And so he flops strip jacks, Jack 10, and faces a pot size bet. So I could kind of go two different ways on this board. I think there's some merit for raising. You protect your hand from any straight draws, any higher flush draws that he has in his hand. There's going to be a lot of bad turn cards for you. Any 9, queen, king, ace is going to give you not that strong of a hand anymore. And so I like raising, calling. I think calling is perfectly fine. I think calling is probably going to be the standard play a lot of times. It's just a spot where when you do raise and you get called, you're kind of, you don't really know like what you're hoping for on the turn. And yeah, and I've kind of thought about this a lot. I've been thinking about the hand a lot, and I think calling there is just going to be standard. I think calling there is just going to be the right play to do. So, although I can be convinced otherwise too. The turn ends up coming to 2 of hearts, so the flush gets there, and Jcarver makes a second nut flush. Now, 15 Kemba bets a little under half pot. So if you want to look at this from a range perspective, now, what exactly does our range look like? So we can assume Jcarver is probably calling 100%. We can assume that when he bets pot on that board, what hands is Jcarver going to call with? He's going to call with any most straight draws. I mean, I'm assuming he's going to call it most straight draws. I would call it most straight draws, almost all my flush draws, almost all of my tens, all of my jacks, some slow play jack 10, some slow play 10-10. Sometimes just overcards, a gut shot. Like, I mean, I'm going to be calling a large amount of time on the flop because he only made it min raise pre-flop. He did bet pot on the flop, but we have position. We are super deep. There's just going to be a lot of cards that change the board on the turn, and we're going to be able to potentially take the pot away. So when our opponent bets 25 and a 56, what do we think he has? Well, we think he has, is he a type of opponent that is going to bet jacks, a trip jacks there on the turn? We don't know too much. Let's just assume that he's not. So let's assume that when he bets the turn, he's going to have flushes and bluffs. So which flushes would he have? Well, he probably is going to have ace high flush, king high flush, queen high flush. Sometimes might just check the 9 high flush. Sometimes might just check the 8 high flush. I think a large majority of the time, most opponents are going to check those hands because they don't think they're going to get value from any worse hands in that spot. So if we go by that and we assume he's betting his bluffs, his ace high flush blockers, his king high flush blockers, his queen high flush blockers. So if we assume that he's betting that sort of range, and just other bluffs too as well. He might bet straight draws. He shouldn't bet straight draws because he's blocking hands that we might have in that spot. But he might bet, like, we don't really know. We can't assume he knows what he's doing. We can't assume he's betting with the right blockers or the right frequencies. So he bets, and now we face the decision. And I think that, you can definitely raise. You get value from a couple hands. You get value from the ace high flush and the king high flush. Sometimes those hands fold, but I don't think they fold that often. But they might. They probably would call the turn and then fold the river if they do. But, I think it's a pretty interesting spot in that. Let's assume that we do call. And on the river, do we think he's going to bluff the river? So we can kind of go to our range. So what does our range look like once we call the turn? We could have floats in our range. We most likely have flushes. We most likely have a lot of flushes in our range and some jacks in our range too. So does our opponent think that we're going to fold those hands on the river enough of the time for him to bet again? We don't really know that for sure. From my experience, most opponents are going to bet the turn there, trying to get you to fold some sort of straight draw that you had or some sort of 10 that you had, and then they're going to give up on the river. So there is some merit to raising the turn and getting value from our hand from those higher flushes. But I just don't know how often he actually has those hands. And, it's kind of a spot where, and this is an interesting spot in PLO where it's like, well, if I raise here, do I get called by worse? And then sometimes people decide not to raise. But in reality, it could be a situation where if I call here, does he bet the river enough of the times as a bluff when my hand looks pretty polarized? And now, until the dynamic develops, until sometimes that's going to be a spot where you just float the turn with your straight draw, looking to take it away on the river. So, but until those dynamics are in place, and until you have a lot of experience playing with your opponents, until you can have a good understanding of what they're doing with their ranges and certain board textures and certain spots, I don't really go in assuming anything about my opponent until I sort of know for sure what they can and cannot do. So we don't know exactly his bluffing frequencies on a lot of rivers on a type of board like this, a Jack 10 deuce board with 3 hearts. So I think that raising or calling is actually fine. In the moment, I was leaning towards more of a call. But when I think about it in retrospect, I think that a raise and hoping he makes a mistake and just calls one straight with a queen high flush, a king high flush, or an ace high flush. And no, either way, honestly, I'm not super in love with either option. I think both options are good. We obviously have a great hand. And the big mistake in the hand comes when our opponent re-raises us all in. So we pretty much have to fold in that spot all the time. There is some merit. He has 10-10, and it's just very hard for us to have Jack 10 in that spot. But I think a lot of times we're never going to be really raising a Jack there unless we have the ace high flush to go along with the Jack. We might be bluffing there, but he doesn't want to re-raise us if we're bluffing because then we're going to fold. And if we do have a flush there and we're looking to get potentially a free showdown on the river, which, that's a lot to assume, then I think we're just going to fold that hand. So I think that once he re-raises, he pretty much always has Jack 10. And it's kind of hard to believe sometimes. I mean, he does pot it, strong hand. He bets $25 in the turn. And that's a little strange to a lot of people. And I think it's an interesting strategy by his opponent. But you pretty much just have to fold here. I mean, this is what makes people winners and losers at players is when you get into spots like this, like, yeah, you don't want to fold blind versus blind. You have the second nuts. But I mean, sometimes you just have to fold strong hands at PLO. It's just your opponent is, like this is what makes the game great. This is what makes it fun. This is what makes it also not fun for a lot of players is that they just don't understand that they have to fold in a spot like that, even though they don't want to fold. Their heart tells them they don't have to fold, but in reality, it's just a fold you have to make. So yeah, so I thought that was a pretty interesting hand. As people in the chat were kind of talking about it, asking questions. What would you do? Would you call the turn or raise the turn? Call the flop, raise the flop? Would you fold to the re-raise? And I think basically it's that you always just fold to the re-raise there on the turn. And I know a lot of people are going to try to find similar spots where you play and think about that. And yeah, try not to overestimate the amount of hands your opponent might have in a situation like that. Somebody in the chat said that could he be overplaying ace-high flush? Most likely not. From my experience, no. They don't overplay the ace-high flush there unless you have a very great amount of information that your opponent would do something crazy like that. So yeah, that's it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And that's it.